Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. So today I am doing a Ramble review. For those of you new to my channel, a Ramble review is where I give my fresh thoughts on a new horror movie that I have just seen. So whatever horror movie has just come out, as soon as I have seen it, I like to come on here and give my fresh thoughts on the movie. This isn't as polished as my Welcome to the Grindhouse series that I do on here. There I like to do a little more research on the movies. I like to make things a little more polished. But in this series I just give my fresh thoughts on a new horror movie that has just come out. And as you can see by the title of this video, today we're talking about The Sadness. I heard about this movie back in 2021. It was going through the film festival circuit at the time, and some people were talking about it getting released in 2021, but it didn't really get a full release until 2022. I knew very little about this movie when I first heard about it, but from what people were telling me, it sounded like some kind of zombie movie. So I wasn't really excited about seeing it. I was curious to an extent because people on my channel know that I am rather zombied out. I don't think much new is done with the zombie genre. Not that you can't do something new with zombie movies, it's just that it seems nowadays rarely is something new done with zombie movies. And because of that, it has kind of gotten me tired of the genre. But I always like to look for something different in the genre. I mean, I used to be a zombie fan many years back. Still plenty of zombie movies I love. But I like to see stuff that's different from the Romero-style zombie movies. I mean, I love Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. But when a new zombie movie comes out, I want it to be different from those movies. And at first, I did not think The Sadness was going to be that, but as it started getting released in 2022, I started hearing more things about it, and hearing that it is quite different from your typical zombie movie. Now, some people would make the argument that this isn't a zombie movie, it's an infected person's movie. You know, something along the lines of 28 Days Later, or things like that. Yes, this movie it's more along the lines of something like Nightmare City, but I always put movies like this in the same category as zombie movies. You know, zombie movies, infected people movies, they're two sides of the same coin. You know, it's like if there's some kind of disease that is spread through the population by, you know, bodily fluids or a bite or blood or something like that, and it causes the population to lose their humanity, for me, that's pretty much a zombie movie. It's very similar. Right off the bat, I am going to say, I fucking loved this movie. It's not a very unique movie, but it is different from a lot of the other zombie movies that have come out nowadays. Like I said, it is something that's more along the lines of Nightmare City. In a way, it's kind of like Return of the Living Dead meets Shivers by David Cronenberg. That seems to be a good way to mix it, because, okay, the infected people in this movie are not necessarily like your traditional zombies. They're not really dead. Like, the zombies in Return of the Living Dead are dead and they're brought back to life by a certain means. But the thing about these zombies, which makes them like the Return of the Living Dead zombies, is they still have their consciousness. They think, they run, they talk, they use tools, they can set traps if they want to. That's what makes it similar to the Return of the Living Dead zombies, but they're definitely more like the zombies from Shivers by David Cronenberg. And if you have not seen Shivers, it's essentially about this parasite that goes into people and turns them into crazed sex maniacs. And that is similar to what happens in The Sadness. So let's get into the plot here. This is an Asian horror movie, and I love Asian horror movies. It follows this group of people trying to survive this new outbreak. There's this virus around that, when it infects people, it doesn't necessarily turn them into mindless zombies, but it takes away their morals. It takes away all their inhibitions. It takes away, basically turns people into complete psychopaths. any dark urges that they have kept deep down within themselves now springs to the surface, and that's all they want to do. It makes people incredibly violent in more ways than one. It just takes people down to this true core of insanity and violence. You know, they have no problem murdering people, they have no problem torturing people, they have no problem raping people. It is animalistic, but it's kind of beyond animalistic, you know? It's just, like I said, it's pretty much pure insanity. And while this is going on, like I said, we're following this group of people who are trying to escape this nightmare situation. Simple premise, done very well, and I always applaud a horror movie when it does something like that. I do like my more complex horror movies, but you know, there are plenty of horror movies with more complex plots that I do love, but I do think that when it comes to horror, simpler is better. Simple idea, play that through. In many ways, that can be more effective. Over-the-top complex horror movies can be fun, but if you want your horror movie to be scary and suspenseful and, in this case, disturbing, then I think it's better to simplify it to an extent. But yes, this is a rather disturbing movie. It's not the most disturbing movie I've ever seen, but it is one of the more... It's a movie that does lean more to the disturbing side, given its subject matter, because again, the zombies in this movie, they just want to kill people and fuck people and torture people, because that's all that's going on in their brain. It is a gory movie, but it's more violent than gory. There is a lot of blood here. Blood is splattered all over the place. But the way it's done, even though there's a lot of blood, and there are some over-the-top moments where arterial spray is going all over the place, and people seem to have more blood in them than any human being should have, but for the most part, the violence is more along the lines of raw, hard-hitting violence, not over-the-top, you know, fun violence that we get in like movies like Dead Alive or Brain Damage, things like that. The violence here is more hard-hitting, more on the realistic side, more on the raw side. That's what makes this movie lean more to the disturbing side. It's not a very disturbing movie, depending on how many disturbing movies you've seen. If you're someone like me who has seen a lot of disturbing movies, this one, it will get to you, but it's not as bad as some of the other stuff you've seen, if you're like me and you've seen a lot of disturbing stuff. Someone who has not seen a lot of disturbing movies and goes into this, it will disturb them more than someone who has dived into that subject matter. Right away, I can say that this is a very good movie, but it's definitely a movie that's not for everybody, given its subject matter. Because again, it's about zombies that are going around killing people and raping people to an extent. When it comes to the sexual assault angle of these zombies, it's not that graphic, it's more suggested. A lot of times these things will happen like just out of view, or like behind a closed door, or just below the camera. It doesn't make it any less disturbing because we still know it's happening, but it's not as graphic in that regards. But the violence is very graphic, the bloodshed is very graphic. They handle it very well, like this insanity here. One of the things I really loved about this movie is it doesn't just throw us into the middle of this outbreak. It starts off with the outbreak, you know, just getting started. Like, you'll see someone riding down the road on their bike, and they'll pass by this ambulance, and you'll see these two people crying, and you'll see someone getting arrested. Watching the movie a second time, you'll know, oh yes, that person was infected, but it's just like a nice little start to the whole thing. And then later on, the character will go back down that road, and he'll see the cop car and the ambulance, but everyone else is gone. So it's like a slow build-up, not a really slow build-up. I mean, when the movie gets going, it gets going, but it builds up to the outbreak in this very clever way. It feels like how an outbreak like this would take place, you know, the beginning of an outbreak like this. It feels like a realistic way of how an outbreak like this would start and how people in the middle of this outbreak would experience it. for the first time. And I really liked that. I really have a lot of respect for that. But like I said, this movie is not for everybody given its controversial subject matter. I loved the movie, but I can understand people not being as into this movie. It doesn't make it a bad movie, it just makes it a movie that some people aren't going to like given its subject matter. The way they handle the zombies in this, or infected people, I'm sorry, I'm just going to call them zombies throughout this video just because it's going to make things easier. But the way they handle the zombies, it's very interesting because they can talk. You can tell that they are the person they were before they got this infection, but they've lost any form of conscious. They just want to do all these bloody things that they might have thought of during their lives, you know, like somebody walks down the street and, you know, and it's a sick thing to say, but every now and again a person might think in the back of their head, I wonder what it would be like to stab somebody. But being a moral person that I'm hoping we all are, you bury that. This movie takes it, this infection takes it to the forefront. There's this great scene on a subway. I'm not going to go into details, but people are on a train, and right away you know something's going to go bad because we've already seen that this outbreak is starting. But these people are on the subway, they don't know that the outbreak has started yet. And it's a good setup. It's a full subway car, and you can just feel the tension building because you know something's going to happen. You're just like, okay, who's gonna be the first infected person who's just going to start tearing people apart? And that's pretty much exactly what happens. You know, someone who's on the subway car just randomly starts stabbing people. And like I said, it's pretty intense. It's like blood splatters all over the place, and people are freaking out. And there is that little thing of wondering, okay, why aren't people trying to stop this guy because he's, you know, going around stabbing people? A lot of us say stuff like that. It's like, oh, if I were in that situation, I would stop that guy right away. But we've never really been in that situation. You know, honestly, it may sound easy, but if you were in that situation, it wouldn't be that easy. You got this guy with a knife just swinging it around trying to hit people. No one's gonna jump him right away because, again, he's swinging around a freaking knife. So, yeah, when we're not in that situation, we can easily say, oh yeah, I'd stop it. But when you're actually in the situation, once you're in that situation, it doesn't seem that easy. And especially after your adrenaline is all hocked up after seeing some person just randomly start stabbing people. But that's what the violence is like, towards, like, in the first act of the movie. In the first act and some of the second act, you know, somebody suddenly becomes infected and they just start going nuts and tearing people apart. It's, like I said, it's very disturbing because sometimes people will just tackle somebody and then just start having their way with them. Not just men, women too. It affects everybody, and it's intense. It's very intense. Now, we do go from zombie set piece to zombie set piece in this movie, but it's a natural progression of the story, and that's what I like. It's not just random scene after random scene after random scene of violence. I mean, we do go from scene after scene to violence, but the story is a natural progression. It feels like we're leading to something, and I don't want to spoil the ending here, but the ending is it's very sad. Zombie movies usually don't have a happy ending. This one is particularly sad, again, given the circumstances, because it's not like a typical zombie movie where the person is completely gone and they're just this mindless eating machine. The person is still them, they just are now crazy and want to murder everybody. And it does a good job setting up the main characters too. You like these characters, and I always say, when you make your characters likable in a horror movie, it makes the horror movie that much more suspenseful, because we care about these people and we don't want to see them die. That's what always drives me nuts whenever somebody says, oh, these characters are just here to die, why, who cares if they're likable? Yeah, but when they're likable, then you're actually on the edge of your seat. You're not just waiting for them to die. You can still like the kills, but at the same time you can be sad to see these people go. the tension works so much better when you give a shit about the characters. And in the sadness, you give a shit about the characters. Another aspect I like about the zombies is when they turn, kind of like 28 Days Later, because in 28 Days Later, when a person becomes infected, their eyes turn like red. The colors of their eyes either turn red or orange or something like that. In the sadness, their entire eye becomes like either black or a really dark red, and sometimes their faces get a little wonky too, you know. But like there's just something about making an eye completely one color that adds to the creepiness of it. I don't know what it is. Like every time I see a completely black, like an eye that's been completely blacked or made completely red, it just gives me that chill, and I like that little detail to these zombies. You know, it's like once they turn, their eyes become black, and it just gives them that little extra oomph, you know? The effects work is really good. There's a lot of practical effects in this movie, and there is some CGI used here and there, but it's not used instead of practical effects. It's used to enhance the practical effects. And I'm always going to be an advocate for practical effects in a horror movie, especially with blood splatter. Like, if you want to use CGI to touch up the gore here and there, I have no issues with that. But if you're going to have, like, liquid splattering on the walls and you're going to use CGI for that, that looks way too cartoony. It doesn't work. They don't do that here. When the blood splatters, they're using actual liquid to make the splatter. But again, there are some moments where they use CGI to touch up the practical effects here and there, and it looks really good. It looks very good. It blends very well together, and that's a way that I'm okay with using CGI. I think CGI should be a tool, not a crutch. You know, I can understand using CGI to make these big worlds and stuff like that, but when it's done with like a smaller thing, use the CGI to maybe touch up a puppet, you know, like when you have a puppet and it's moving its mouth, maybe add a little CGI there to make the mouth move a little more fluid, or its eyes blink a little more fluid. Don't replace the whole puppet with CGI, just use the CGI to touch things up here and there. That is how I think CGI should be used, as a tool to touch things up, not a crutch. And the sadness uses CGI as a tool. So, now, going back to the violence, it's similar to the movie it's similar to the movie Possessor, which came out in 2020. It is a little more over the top than the violence in Possessor, but it's in a similar vein. There's not a lot of violence in Possessor. But it is like a little more raw, a little more realistic, a little more like hard-hitting. The violence in Possessor is made to like give you a punch in the gut, much like in The Sadness, and I respect these two movies for doing something like that. Let me know if you'd like me to talk about The Possessor. I absolutely loved Possessor, and if you'd like me to talk about that, please let me know. But all in all, I don't really have much else to say about this movie. It's not the most original zombie movie or infected person movie, but I appreciate it because it's a step away from the Romero zombies. As much as I love the Romero zombies, I want zombie movies that do something different, that do something that's not normally what we see nowadays with zombie movies, and I think The Sadness does that. This is going to be blasphemy here, but I liked this more than Train to Busan. Unfortunately, Train to Busan was hyped up a little too much for me before I could see it, so I was a little let down when I saw that. I'll give it another chance in the future, but I liked this one more than Train to Busan. Not saying that it's better than Train to Busan, it's just that me personally, this fit my tastes a little more. If you like movies that are a little more on the darker side, that deal with slightly more disturbing subject matter, I would check out The Sadness. I think it's a decent stepping stone for people who are curious about watching more disturbing movies, because this movie does get disturbing with its subject matter, but it's not as graphic with the subject matter of sexual assault. It does happen in the movie, but it happens just off camera or just out of view, which in some cases kind of makes it worse because then you fill in the blanks with your mind, but still, okay, like, this is a big recommendation from me. If you like Asian horror movies, if you're okay with a little darker subject matter in your movies, or if you're curious to start checking out some more disturbing cinema, I think I think the sadness is a good way to go. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say about this movie. It is a big recommendation from me. I loved it. Some people might not. Do some research first before you watch it to see if it's a movie that you would like. Well, that's about it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, as always. I still appreciate the support. I'll have a regular review for you next week. I just wanted to give my thoughts on this movie. If you've seen The Sadness, let me know what you thought down below. And on that note, this is the Maniac here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die.